to present for us. She is a speaker, trainer, and a psychotherapist who specializes in anxiety, depression, grief and trauma, and sports psychology. Currently, Leah provides teletherapy for individuals and families in her own private practice in Charlotte. She is sought out by corporations to work with executives and teams on improving communication, productivity, and job satisfaction. To learn more about Leah Marone and the services she provides, you can go to her website, leahmarone.com. And without further ado, I present to you Leah Marone.
Well, hello. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today, and I really appreciate you having me. And I know, Victoria, we were kind of just before we got started, just kind of going to have a discussion about kind of what's been going on the last few weeks, and actually just, I mean, it's been going on a lot longer than that, but just kind of with what's been going on and the terrible tragedies that have been happening. And I thought you and I could just have a real quick discussion on that. Yeah.
I know that, today it's about coping with the pandemic and addressing grief and self-compassion. That's kind of originally what, this webinar was going to be about, but, what this pandemic has, developed into is also what you're seeing now, the outrage and the anger and of like what's happening within the Black community and the racial injustice that's happening. And that has now become part of our collective experience. We're all, suffering and angry. And so this too has very much become part of learning how we cope and learning how we deal with the challenges that we're presented. It's now become a double pandemic. We're both dealing with a virus, but we're also dealing with really addressing and looking at systemic change.
Absolutely. And, and like we said, this has been going on for years and years and years, but I think just these recent things have really hit home for a lot of us, finally. And I think the biggest thing to take away from this, especially just in the white community, is to start listening in a different way, right? And keeping communication and conversations going. And, the minute you think you can relate or know it all, or you're not racist or you're not prejudiced, that's when you need to remind yourself that we still have learning to do, and we'll always have learning to do. And I think it's important also to just remind ourselves that we don't need to know the exact thing to say. And that's with any type of grief, we don't need to know exactly what to say, but it's just a process. It's a learning process, and we need to keep these things open and keep drilling it in our minds and those around us that we need to keep talking about it, and we need to keep, fighting for this change on all levels. So,
And part of, likening it to, grief, part of it, what that looks like is, checking in with your Black friends or, and asking them how they're doing. I think that people feel both like burdened by the race conversation and also very like scared of having the race conversation and scared of making a mistake or scared of saying the wrong thing. But it's better to say something and acknowledge it than say nothing at all. And so just like with grief, you want to check in with your friends, not just now, but even like down the road, and have this be important and have this be a learning experience. Like, I guess what I'm saying is like, to be a white ally is to continue to learn, to never stop learning, to never stop talking about it, to never stop kind of speaking up in places where perhaps Black people don't have access to. So like amongst your white friends, amongst having hard conversations with your family, not just now, but like.
Absolutely. And definitely. That's right. And I wanted to share something. It was actually really interesting. I have two girls, and we went for their wellness check yesterday. And our pediatrician is a Black female. And we had a discussion. She was so gracious to kind of have a discussion with us and my girls about just what she's going through. And we had a discussion about that. And I loved the analogy that she used, given my girls' ages as well. And she said, I'm sure you've heard the phrase Black Lives Matter. And I'm sure, you've also heard the phrase where other people kind of counter and say, well, all lives matter. And she said, I want you to imagine your street and, your neighborhood and all the houses matter, right? All the houses matter. There's life in the houses. There's families, different types of families, whatever, living in all these houses, and they all matter. But picture one of those houses on fire, right? One of those houses is on fire, and there's a sense of urgency with that house, right?
Yeah.
And we need to react, and the fire department has to come, and we have to put it out or else it's going to be destroyed. And so there's a different level of need there, right? They all matter, but this house is currently on fire. And she gave that analogy, and I wanted to share that today because I think it was really powerful, not only I think for my girls to hear, but for me to hear. And I wanted to share that because I think it was a really good analogy where she just summed it up as like, there's a sense of urgency, and there has been, and we need to pay attention or else it's just going to burn. So
to go off of that analogy, I would say that we can't expect the people in the house to be the ones to put out the fire. Like the community needs to come out. The community needs to all the neighbors need to come out and help put out that fire.
Correct. Yes. And so lots of grief, like you said, there's been, I think that's the one phrase or the one term and cycle that I really have used a lot to just sum up this pandemic. And then this also, a multitude of grief that we're going through. But I think that is one thing. We've all gone through various stages and different emotions throughout COVID, right? We've all experienced some types of loss, whether it's you lost your job, whether you're anticipating losing your job, whether you've had financial burdens, whether you've actually been sick or known someone that has passed away or been sick or, from this illness or this virus. Our routines have been disturbed. Our kids, if you have kids, we've had to adapt different roles. Maybe we have to be a, homeschool teacher now, as well as maybe our professional, as well as a parent. So, our sense of belonging, who we hang out with, our sources of validation, all these things have been changed. And with that, we go through grief. We go through all those stages, and all of us might be in various stages, different stages. We may circle back, and that's how grief is. So I think kind of what you said earlier, making a point to really check in with each other. Not giving yourself that expectation of like, I need to say the right thing, I need to do the right thing. But also I think the point we're missing a lot too, and what I want to hone in a lot on today is checking in with ourselves. And I think in our society and our culture, we're not taught, and we don't do a very good job of checking in with ourselves without that intense judgment piece. Kind of thinking, what is wrong with me? Why am I not capable of this? What am I doing wrong? Oh God, something's wrong. This is how it's going to be now. I think we're very quick sometimes to jump to that rather than just accepting that every day is not going to be great. Every day is not going to be stable. And I'm sure you can all relate and kind of latch onto the fact that there have been several days here recently that have been like that.
And so, that it's like, it's okay to not be okay right now. Like, I've had a number of clients be like, I'm really upset. I'm very angry. And I'm like, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not okay. So that's an appropriate feeling. Right. And not try to like change it or to not try to ignore it or put it aside, but like feel it and say like, and to really feel it and acknowledge it. And because I think that like anxiety shows you what you care about. And if you're upset and you're angry, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think too, we can all experience a lot of these things in different ways. So some of us may have sleep disturbances. Some of us may have, our eating may have changed. Our desire to move or exercise may have changed for better or for worse, just that motivational piece. Stress and anticipation and anxiety overall, has probably changed on some level. And maybe for some, the constant need for distraction. It's interesting. I work though with a lot of people that have intense social anxiety. And they have told me that due to all this and kind of the boundaries and things that have been put in place due to COVID, they've actually had a sense of relief because they do have that built-in boundary, and they don't have to feel bad for not participating kind of with society to a certain degree. It's been interesting to have them kind of talk about that sense of relief and kind of being able to focus on them in a different way. But then on the flip side, people that are, coined highly extroverted, them kind of feeling that urgency and rest to create new outlets and new releases. So again, we've all dealt with it and we've all had different hurdles and different things. But the reality is that you're supposed to have hurdles with change. You're supposed to have a variation in how you feel and how you adjust. And I think we've all had the tall order of creating new routines and creating new structure. And on that note, I'm actually going to try to share this, share these slides here. So let me, hopefully this goes through.
And I do want to invite people, if they have any questions, feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we will make time at the end to answer them. So feel free to, or if a question comes up, we'll see if we can try to answer it as we go through.
Absolutely. And I kind of always kind of go back to this, not just now, but kind of throughout my life. And I think it's a good check-in sometimes to, it's always a good idea to sometimes imagine that you have a balloon in your belly. And of course, when a balloon gets too full of air, what happens? It pops, right? And so it's really important, especially this time as we've had to readjust in what ways we use to let air out of our balloon, right? And if we continue to kind of let it go and we don't acknowledge how we feel and we let things build and build and build, we're going to eventually pop. It only takes that last bit of air to get there. And so again, it's so important. And I know I kind of hit on this a little bit, but grief, and we are experiencing it due to all the massive changes, and even the simple things of going and getting food, how the vibe in the grocery stores are different, how just the vibes passing people, and everyone kind of, wondering how to react, how to respond. So just the simple tasks that we were generally used to and had in our daily lives, those have been changed. And so we've had some reactions to those, and kind of acknowledging, and again, being patient with ourselves and others, because we all do have different backgrounds. We all do have different experiences, different traumas that we've gone through, different levels of resiliency. And so we're all going to handle this in very different ways. So again, that patience piece is so important, and also acknowledging that every day is not going to be graceful. If you kind of scan your history and think about all the things that you've navigated so far. I mean, you're here today, right? You've navigated so many things, and some of them probably quite gracefully, and some of them probably not so gracefully. But the fact of it is that we all have a sense of resilience. We've all made it this far, right? And so sometimes even just remembering and reflecting on that can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I'd say that this is completely unprecedented. We have never experienced anything like this. So the expectation that we then, cope with it well is completely unrealistic.
Yes, absolutely. And so again, I'm just going to, and a lot of you may say, I'm already doing this. Some of you may say, I can't quite get myself to do this. And you need to reframe and restructure and kind of take this in what works for you. So this is not to add another element of pressure or expectation, but these are just some things that I've noticed in working with people, and that, I know that makes a difference just in how we kind of operate. And I think the biggest thing is, if you do think about the natural transitions that we had prior to this pandemic, whether it was going to an office or going to the places in your car, or by walking on a bus, whatever it was, you had that built-in transition, right? You had built-in transitions from going maybe place to place, seeing people, and those were all of a sudden kind of gone. And so I think our routines and our natural transitions were, again, they're gone, and we've had to kind of recreate them. But it is so important to establish some type of routine. And again, this does not have to be rigid, and you don't want to set yourself up for failure, but yourself, and if you're that person that's really struggling to kind of get out of bed and to, have that motivation to get started. And what I would say is that, the human brain, we really like to see things done from start to finish, even if they're very minor things, even if it's, folding a towel and putting it away, even if it's brushing our teeth, even if it's getting out of bed and, getting dressed. We feel this sense of minor, even with minor tasks, this sense of accomplishment, and that gives us motivation and keeps us kind of going, right? So it's really important, I think, in the morning to establish some type of rhythm, some type of routine that you do. And that could be as simple as, I'm going to get up and I'm going to get dressed, and I'm going to wash my face and brush my teeth, and I'm going to go from there. And you see how you go. And that's great. And I think that a lot of people that I've worked with, that's been a big challenge. There hasn't been that external motivator to do that. So I really would urge you, if you haven't done that already, to get some type of routine. And one way to kind of look at this too is, having bookends. Okay. So in the morning, something that you can control, something that you can do from start to finish. And whether that's even your cup of coffee, whether that's getting out of bed and getting dressed, whether that's some type of movement. And then at the end of the day, having your other bookend, something that's you, that you can control, something that's for you, and that you're going to stay committed and deliberate with. And that can be so helpful, just to have those two caps on the either end of the day to keep you grounded.
Even just like waking up in the morning, as you said, and getting dressed. Like, it's so easy to kind of like stay in our pajamas. Like, you get up in the morning, you get breakfast in your pajamas, and it's easy to kind of just like let that kind of go on for the rest of the day. But even just like getting up and you know, changing into like clothes as if you were to go outside is so helpful, and makes it kind of feel more like put together. And that in and of itself can be really helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, and I know for some of this may be harder than others. You know, you may have a studio apartment, you may not have a lot of room to do this, but creating those unique spaces, if possible. I do have someone I work with, and she kind of has a very small studio apartment, and we really worked on creating one corner of that space that's her workspace, and that's where she goes for her work, and that's it. And kind of having those places around your home that are designated for certain roles that you're in. And don't get me wrong, I know that a lot of us, if you do have children, or if you are kind of multitasking several roles, it can be very hard to do that. But I think setting yourself up, and again, creating those transitions as best you can in your space, can be really helpful and help you avoid kind of that, you know, feeding into that multitasking, which in turn really creates stress. So kind of creating those spaces and creating those transitions can be very, very helpful.
And like not doing work while you're in bed, because that can be, you don't associate your places where you sleep with the stress and anxiety of going to work, of like work stress.
Yeah. So having those cutoffs is really important. And I know some days are easier than others, but that's really, really important. And I know I've talked about completing small tasks, but that's so important too. And you know, even if you're doing the dishes, even if you're having your cup of coffee, really being deliberate and focusing on what you're doing, even if it's a simple task, and not allowing your brain to multitask and do, you know, 3 things at once. And I know that might be very hard sometimes for parents, but really being deliberate with at least 1 or 2 things a day where you're like, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I need to focus on. And it can be such a cleanse for your mind. So limiting distractions as best you can too, and kind of not falling into that, you know, just running around and kind of going from one thing to another, which is very easy to do, I think, in our place where we live.
So in essence, it's like kind of doing something mindfully, like trying to really just bring like acute attention to like one thing.
Exactly. And that will improve your productivity. That will improve just how how you are kind of navigating your day and how you're improving things. Something else that, and you know, I need to come up with a better phrase, but I've kind of coined it as care chart. And something that I've worked with a lot of my clients with is, you know, again, I have several clients who are extremely type A, and they have their schedule down and they're able to stick to it, and that's wonderful for them. But I have a lot of people who they've tried to set goals, they've tried to set some type of structure, and they maybe are reaching too high or setting these really high expectations, and then ultimately they fail, and they kind of have this all or nothing, you know, kind of thing going, which, you know, in turn can create that sense of failure and just not lead to good thoughts. And so a good thing to kind of keep in mind is a care chart. And what I mean by a care chart is having maybe just even 3 little areas that you focus on daily. So one of them might be physical, okay? And what I mean by physical is some type of movement. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you need to go out and run 3 miles every day, but this is an opportunity to check off that physical box, but also by listening to your body and your mind and seeing where you are in that day. So if you're, you know, if stretching works for you that day because you're listening to your body and that's all you can do, that's fantastic. If walking is all you can do, if doing an exercise, whatever it may be, just focus on some type of movement. Going outside does wonders. And I know a lot of people have kind of taken advantage of those walks and getting outside, but that is really critical. And so having something in your physical box that you check out, but having that leeway and that flexibility to be mindful of where you are that day is really important. Another example of a box or kind of a bubble that you could create for yourself is connection. So how are you going to connect with someone today? You know, whether that's someone that you live with, or if you're living alone, how are you going to connect? How are you going to make that effort? And it's been more of a challenge, but I think that connection piece is extremely important. And so that could be a box that you check. Another one too is just overall, maybe you have a reflection or a self-care box, and that could be something that maybe you practice your gratitude, maybe you practice your reflection, maybe too you do something for yourself and you put on a face mask, or you do something that is a level of self-care for you, something that you're giving back to yourself. And there can be all different types of bubbles, something that you learn, something new that you've learned today, something that you read, but just having 3 or 4 things and 3 or 4 bubbles that kind of keep you structured and keep you goal oriented, but also not creating that rigidity and setting yourself up for failure can be extremely helpful. I think also practicing presence, and presence means showing up, being in the here and now, just being mindful of what you're doing and how it's affecting you on all levels. And I want to share with you a really simple reset and kind of mindfulness practice that anyone can do. And a lot of times I recommend doing this maybe while you're in the shower, which, hopefully we're doing that these days, right? So maybe in the shower, or maybe while you're eating. And so if we take the shower, for example, all you do is you scan and you go through your 5 senses. So for example, what do you see? And you be really deliberate. It's almost like the mind of a toddler, right? Super specific, super detailed, all the way down to maybe the mold in your grout, whatever it may be. But you scan, you see what you see, and you call it out, and you're very deliberate with it. You go over what you smell, what you feel, the temperature, anything like that, and be really mindful of that, what your body's feeling during that time, what you're hearing, and what you may taste. And just that act alone, there's no room for anything else. You're executing a part of your brain where anxiety can't kind of squeeze its way in, right? Or your to-do list can't squeeze its way in. And it acts as a kind of like a flush or a reset. And it's such a good practice, whether you're feeling that angst or that urgency at that time or not. And so I really would urge you and encourage you on a daily basis to insert that into your day, whether it is when you're outside, whether it's in the shower, whether when you're eating, just practicing that presence and clearing your mind and focusing in on something. And it does wonders. It does. It's kind of like a reset for you, and it kind of flushes everything out because there's no room. So that's something I wanted to share with you. I have one client who actually does it every morning with her coffee. She says, I love my coffee. That's when I'll remember to do it. And she's incredibly deliberate with all the steps it takes to brew her coffee, what she's feeling, what she's smelling, what she's tasting. And she really, that is her practice. That is her presence practice during the day. And she said it's such a wonderful way for her to start the day. So I really would invite you to find some room for that in your day. And I think that's a way of being more proactive and preventative, so that your balloon, that's a way to let the air out of your balloon. And I know you all probably have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but this is something I go back to often. Whether I'm overwhelmed with something, or trying to, do 50 things at once, or can't quite get my thoughts in order, I kind of always go back to, okay, are you being deliberate with your sleep? Are you setting yourself up for a good night's sleep? Are you getting your basic needs taken care of? Are you trying to eat well? If not, what's getting in the way of that? Are you drinking enough water? Are you moving throughout the day? Because if I'm not being deliberate with those things and the basic needs that I have just as a human being, how am I I can't expect myself to kind of execute these cognitive thoughts and all these cognitive parts of my brain without getting the basics done. It's like trying to drive your car without putting gas in it. Mm-hmm. Something I think that's really important. And again, if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm always overwhelmed, or I'm always feeling this way, or I've just been so distraught with what's been going on, it's such a good reminder to kind of go back and think about what you can start to reflect on, start to be deliberate with, and start to control.
And sleep, I feel like, is like such an important, it's such an important reset. Like, if you're going to focus on anything, try to regulate your sleep. I think with kind of the days blending in together, it's very easy to kind of stay up later, sleep in later. Our sleep cycles, have are impacted by stress. So that could mean sleeping more than you're normally used to, or sleeping less than you're normally used to.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like practicing, really just trying to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time, trying to like limit screen time, 30 minutes to an hour before bed.
Mm-hmm.
Just like kind of like focusing on those. If you're going to prioritize anything, try to prioritize, getting good sleep. Because as you said, like it's the foundation for us to be able to kind of do all the other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I think too, I know if you've had some sleepless nights, or anxiety loves to creep in kind of during the night hours, right? And I think it's sometimes helpful. I think sometimes we tend to fight it, right? We tend to say, oh, here we go again. Or why am I feeling this way? Why at night? Why is this happening? And there's a lot of different things you can do, but I think you talked about too, setting yourself up for a good night's sleep is key. So, just being mindful of how you're preparing yourself for sleep. Are you on your phone? Are you watching the news? Are you getting sucked into things and stimulating those parts of your brain where the melatonin is trying to touch as well? But I think too, something that is kind of helpful is when your mind is going at that rapid rate at night, know too that it is working on something. And it's not the best time, I know, for it to be working on something. But if you kind of think about like, my mind is trying to process something. My mind is trying to figure something out. It's almost like you're trying to build a puzzle and you don't have about 15 of the pieces, right? And it can be very frustrating. But sometimes moving into that, and not resisting, but moving into that helpful surrendering phase where you think, okay, this is where I'm at tonight. This makes sense with how maybe I've been feeling, or maybe I'm not addressing things during the day. And this is the outlet that anxiety has found. And so sometimes, again, it's really helpful to just say, my mind is working on something. And you know what? Tonight might not be the night that I get the best sleep, but what I can control right now is that I'm going to rest. I'm going to try to rest my body. I'm going to acknowledge the fact that my brain is working and it's working on something. A lot of times too, when I work with athletes, and this kind of works for anyone, if we think about like a sore muscle, if you wake up in the morning and you're sore, most of the times we don't tend to freak out about that. It's more like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Or wow, that workout must have been intense. Or did I sleep weird? Or what's going on? And we try to problem solve a little bit. But we also acknowledge the fact that our bodies are working on something, right? There was some type of change, something that happened, and our bodies are trying to work on it. And so we need to kind of give it that grace. And don't get me wrong, it can be frustrating, but we need to give it that grace and know that it's got to work it out. And if you kind of think of your mind that way, with anxiety, and rather than fighting it and building that layer of anxiety on top of the anxiety, it can be really, really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a couple comments that there's like, some people are having difficulty getting out of bed, that perhaps sometimes they stay in bed for a long time, or that they feel guilty if they stay in bed a longer time. And I like what you said about like giving yourself grace, feeling badly about staying in bed is not helpful. It's just going to make you feel badly, and feeling badly is going to make you feel depressed, which is going to make you stay in bed longer. So, right. Like, so if like by being compassionate, with ourselves, and being, kind to ourselves, that can actually be helpful, even if it feels challenging. And in terms of like getting out of bed, I think that if you can try to find something that you really look forward to, like maybe like a delicious breakfast, or maybe like, say, I'm only going to watch TV in this room, and I really want to watch this show, so I have to kind of get out of bed to do that. That can be helpful. Mm-hmm. Another question is that sometimes the routines or like the days become like repetitive. What's something you can do to shake up your routine?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And two, just on that the sleep note, if you really are finding it hard to get out of bed, make one of your bookends happen in your bed. So that could be like stretching, like, okay, I'm laying here, I don't want to get up. I need to do at least 3 stretches in my bed. I need to get my blood flowing, right?
Yeah.
I need to, maybe even doing the contraction and letting it go. Or maybe you do some box breathing. Or maybe you think about, okay, what's something that is good today? Or what's something, just something, if you really can't get out of bed, work where you are and change up something that you do in bed. And even that changing up your blood flow may give you that motivation, like, okay, now I got to make my bed, or maybe I got to get out of my bed. So I just wanted to comment on that really quick. but yes, the kind of the monotony, and we're all kind of in Groundhog Day and forgetting what day it is and all of that. And I think the biggest thing, like I really would suggest working on some of those bubbles, like those care charts, and having things that you do. And so you get some variety in that. So whether yours is, you know, reading something new or learning something new, or you know, organizing something. I mean, it could be a number of things, but that is going to keep you structured, but create enough variety and give you that momentum of like, I did that today, even again, if it's a minor task. So that can be something that can be, you know, give you some variety, but yet keep you structured at the same time, and be creative with it. You know, I know a lot of people have, had big projects that they've done, you know, as a family. Some people do puzzles, some people do a lot of things. I know, my husband and I just did a walking challenge this last month. And I think challenges are interesting, where if you have a friend, or even with yourself, you know, putting a chart that you even handmade on your refrigerator and having some type of goal that you need to accomplish every day, and seeing, you know, someone else and kind of working with them and getting that kind of competitive nature going a little bit, that can be really motivating. And I know it's kind of the same thing, but again, those start to finish tasks and that variety can be so incredibly helpful. And you get the variety of working with someone and kind of achieving a goal together.
That's a great, you know, they definitely say that you're more likely to commit to something if you have like a buddy in it. But I like what you say, and you know, at least I found that, you know, I might have like, you know, all these great ideas of what I like should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
But unless I really like schedule them out, like really just put them in my schedule, like, you know, Monday from 5 to 6, I'm going to do this. That can be helpful, because otherwise it's like, yeah, I'll do it later, or yeah, I'll do it later this week, or that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. But really kind of making like an activity schedule, making like a list of things that you like enjoy doing, and then, and really truly like putting them in your schedule or your plan for the day, like you would an appointment. And I like what you said again about like an accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Like doing it with somebody can help keep you accountable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it can be really fun too.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, and this kind of goes into anxiety in the moment. And I wanted to I thought it might be helpful to, like, in the moment, if you're experiencing some pretty intense anxiety, or kind of, you know, on the hamster wheel with thoughts, or even having panic attacks where, you know, you feel like your body is just kind of operating on its own, and they're scary. Your heart rate, your breath, your body temperature, everything kind of increases. So I wanted to kind of talk about regaining power in the moment when you are experiencing intense anxiety. And I know a lot of people will say, and I'm a firm believer too, of breath. And sometimes, you know, box breathing in for 4, exhaling for 4, and really regulating and staying focused on that. And a lot of times that's hard for people, especially when they're in that really intense stage of anxiety. It's really hard to control that. And a lot of people tend to give up on that right away, and that's okay. But that is one that, you know, I wanted to share anyway, because I think it's a great one to try and to start with. If you are at that stage where your body temperature is increasing, your heart rate is increasing, you're feeling that almost like adrenaline, you know, fueling through you, something that can be really, really helpful is a cold compress. Getting an ice pack, frozen bag of peas, a cold water bottle, something cold, and putting it right on your chest. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it kind of shocks your system a little bit. It serves as a distraction, and your body kind of has to readjust where it focuses for a second. And it kind of gives you that snap to kind of collect your thoughts and have some other different parts of your brain get tapped into. And I think another one too is just the walking and changing the blood flow. Walking, doing something active can also change that blood flow so that you don't feel stuck, and kind of regain some of that control. These 3 questions, I use these a lot in my practice with people. And again, I think this can really be helpful if you're experiencing kind of that in the middle of the night type of anxiety, which is terrible. Even anxiety during the day, which is also terrible. But if you ask yourself, so we're full blown emotion at that point, right? Anxiety is so emotionally jam packed. And what our goal is in that moment is to have some logic seep in, right? We kind of want that logic to seep in so we get rebalanced. And so if you kind of ask yourself, what are my options? And even the practice of going through all your options, whether you're going to execute them or not, is so helpful. You're kind of activating a part of your brain that hasn't had room because anxiety's taken over. So what are your options with something? So I'm going to use being in traffic. And I know we haven't really been in traffic for the last few months probably, but when we're in traffic, it's typically not something that we like, right? And we're stuck. And so if you think about it, normally as our frustrations are rising, or maybe our angst is rising, you know, things like that. So if you ask yourself, what are your options? Well, I could get out of the car and walk. I could throw a tantrum. I could look to the car to the right or left of me and see how they're reacting to this. I could turn on the radio. I could call a friend. I could, you know, you may not execute these things, but just again, going through your options and what you have and being present with where you're currently at is incredibly helpful. And it triggers that logic to seep in. What can you control? It may be nothing. You know, in regards to this pandemic, what can you control? Well, you may be able to control if you leave your house. You may be able to control who you come in contact with. You may be able to control. And again, going through these things is that process of activating that part of your brain. And the really important one too is, where can you surrender? Because if you think about anxiety, anxiety is so future or past focused, right? We're out of the present, right? And these questions help you kind of get back there. So where can you surrender? What is too big and really that you can't control, that you can let go? And a lot of us think of surrender sometimes as a weakness or kind of in a negative connotation, but it's actually incredibly freeing. And it's incredibly empowering, because it brings us back to the point that we honestly don't have control over much. And we don't need to take on that task of trying to control everything. So again, kind of pinpointing what's not mine. What do I need to let go? And these questions, again, the goal, if you work through these, you're balancing that logic with emotion, and it can be incredibly helpful in the moment with anxiety. Mm-hmm. And two, I kind of want to move in to just some ways to be proactive rather than reactive. So those are kind of some things you can do in the moment. If you're like, okay, I'm there, I'm feeling anxious, and this is how I'm feeling right now. But being proactive, and that's kind of, again, goes back to Maslow's, taking care of your physical needs, taking care of your emotional needs, you know, making sure your basic needs are met to the best of your ability, and really being deliberate with that, the sleep, the water, the movement. You're being proactive, right? You're letting that air out of your balloon on a daily basis, right? And so this slide right here, I think there's also, if we kind of flip it a little bit and kind of acknowledge, and it may be hard for some of you, and I totally understand, but if we kind of look at some of the good and the positives that have come out of this, in terms of the pandemic and kind of this time where we've had to pause and we've had to readjust, and maybe we've had to get reconnected with ourselves in ways that we haven't for years. We've had to maybe face some things that we've been totally distracted from for years, which is a tall order, but a good one. And families, you know, maybe have reunited, or maybe if you live alone, just connecting with people virtually that you haven't connected with for a long time. And again, just the pace has kind of slowed down a little bit. So finding a time to be grateful, you know, whether you like to journal, whether you like to show appreciation for people who maybe have asked how you're doing, or been checking in on you, or you checking in on them, and providing that support. I think another way to do it, and this is a really cool thing to do with your family, or just anyone. You can do this virtually, you can do this on your own, but it's the 3 S's. And so if you think about something that was your sweet, it's called sweet, sour, and service. You think about your sweet for the day, right? And this doesn't have to be a fantastic over the top sweet. This could just be like, that was okay. That was good. That was a good part of my day. And looking at your sweet and identifying it and validating it. And then your sour, what wasn't so great? What maybe triggered some, emotions that we coin normally as negative? What was that? Okay. And not judging it, right? And then the last one is service. How did you serve someone? How did you support someone? What did you do that maybe positively impacted someone? Mm-hmm. Right? And in going through those days, and again, it's a self-reflection. It's a good way to stay present in your day and to pay that gratitude, right?
I think that the gratitude part is really important, because if you consider that what you focus on determines how you feel, mm-hmm. and you realize that you ultimately have control of what you choose to focus on. Mm-hmm. But ultimately you control how you feel. So if you don't like the way that you're feeling down, if you're feeling anxious, if you are intentional with what you choose to focus on, right, you can change the way that you feel, and that can be very powerful. So thinking about the silver linings, right? I heard people say that 2020 is the worst year. Nothing could be worse. July is going to be the month of like vampires or like, you know, zombies next, right? But, you know, a reframe is like, what if this 2020 was like the year where everything changed?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, where we like really learn to appreciate connection in our families,
Mm-hmm.
or we learned a new skill, or we kind of were able to reconnect with ourselves, or like ultimately we were able to slow down.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And we're going to have an interesting, you know, we don't know how this is going to turn out, if it is going to flip back to what we saw as normal before, but I think we have this interesting opportunity, and we have, I think already, of what we're going to allow back in to our life, right? Since a lot of things have been kind of naturally omitted, what we're going to allow to come back in. Are we going to go back to kind of the constant distractions and the constant, you know, stimulation, or are we going to be more mindful about what we allow in, and, you know, be more deliberate with, you know, kind of the roles that we have? So it's going to be, it's an interesting thing, but again, I know you guys can read these, but I think just kind of, again, acknowledging where you're at and omitting that judgment piece, and validating yourself that your expectations, and I hate that word anyway, but that you're kind of what you expect or what you want to shoot for, that has to change because everything else has, right? And kind of setting your boundaries and setting your own tone and reworking that is so important. And so I also just wanted to go over, and, you know, Victoria, please feel free to chime in with this as well, but when to get help, you know, and get some help. And I know there's a stigma around that a lot. But I think during these times too, if you've noticed, like if you have had any suicidal ideation or kind of really, really deep negative self-talk, that just is kind of perpetual. You had intense sleep issues that just, I mean, you can't seem to work it out. You found that like maybe you're using substances or using, you know, other things as intense distractions from your thoughts. You know, high levels of anxiety, having panic attacks, just again, not being able to focus on anything else and not being able to kind of clear that clutter. I think or if, you know, obviously there's a lot of people that unfortunately are stuck in very intense situations at home, and they used to use school or work or, you know, all these different things as kind of respite from interacting with people in abusive situations. So if you know anybody or you're feeling these things, you know, get some support. Like we all have needed it on different levels. And I know most therapists now are doing virtual sessions. And I know Psychology Today and Therapy Tribe are great search engines for this. But I don't want people to feel like they're alone. And I want people to feel like that, you know, it's okay to ask for help, and it's what we need to do, and we all need it at different times, and now it makes sense.
Yeah, the DC Psychological Association has a therapist finder. It's under Find a Therapist. Mm-hmm. And there essentially are members who have created profiles, and they indicate whether they're providing teletherapy, what their specializations are. And it's a great way to find a therapist and whether they take insurance. And it's a great way to find a therapist because like after the pandemic, you might want to continue therapy and you have like a local therapist, because these are all therapists in the DC, Virginia, and Maryland area. So the therapist finder is like a great way. Like you said, Psychology Today is another great way. We also have like resources on our under our like COVID task force page that for community resources and resources for our therapists too. But like they're under that, we have like lots of like, you know, free online classes you can take. You know, we had a question about like, how do we kind of shake things up? Like, you know, we have a whole list of like, you know, online classes or exercise classes, things that you can do from home that are free. So everything's free that we put up there. So yeah, definitely like use your resources. Like, you know, there's tons of them out there.
There are, absolutely are. And I just wanted to say too, like there's Psychology Today and Therapy Tribe. And I know it sounds like you guys have tons of resources on your platform as well. So those are great. And I think too, like I want to take this time, I know we have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to kind of take this time to answer any questions and just kind of use this as a time to address those, if anybody has any.
Let's see if any questions pop up in the chat.
And if not, that's okay.
Yeah, that's actually, I guess, one question is, in terms of like activities, what kind of, like, perhaps like physical activities that you could do within like your house might be helpful? Because there's some people, someone in the chat said that they haven't been outside for 3 weeks. So, that could be for a number of reasons, but I'm wondering if, like, in part, like things that you could do at home that are like active.
Yeah, perfect. So I think, like, even, I mean, most of our phones nowadays, or even if you have your whatever, that you can count your steps on some, some level or some way, whether it's again, there's so many apps, there's so many things that we can do to count our steps. And that's a good one to keep you focused. Like, just challenge yourself with getting a certain number of steps, walking around where you live, getting those steps in, or maybe setting goals of, like, I need to do something active, whether it's getting up and doing 10 jumping jacks every hour. I think too, just, again, it's, if you look at it more of movement, if you are struggling with, like, I know I should be exercising, or I want to exercise, or I have these weight goals I want to get and I haven't done it yet, and you're kind of beating yourself up with that, kind of reframe it for yourself and look at it more, not as exercise and that I have to do these things, but just movement, and getting yourself up and just moving your body and looking at it as, again, kind of that tier and kind of the, prescription of what we need as human beings. Right. And so if you kind of just look at that, and maybe, I actually have one, now that I'm thinking about it, I have one client that I work with, and she says, she doesn't live in a huge place, but she says, I walk into every one of my rooms every day 3 times, and I find something that maybe I need to move or I need to do. And that's my way of kind of making my laps. She's like, I used to kind of walk on a track. And now my thing that I do is I kind of walk into every room, and I may do a different little exercise or movement in every room, or I may see something that needs to be moved or something that needs to be put away. And then I go down to the next room, and I may do, 10 jumping jacks, or I may find the towels that need to be put, and so she's used that as kind of her personal track, her personal little gym, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of things I know too. There's, and I'm sure it's on your website, like a lot of these, but there's so many, if you want that structure and you want that motivation, there's so many virtual workouts that you can subscribe to or get free, for 30 days or whatever it may be. But I also think if you're really struggling with it, do have someone join you, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, whether it's a coworker, whoever it may be. Just be like, hey, are you up for a challenge? And you don't have to have the same challenge as them, but put something down that you can commit to for 30 days and kind of create that habit for yourself. I think that can be really inspiring and really check in on yourself.
That's a good, or like if you're, let's say, like if you take a phone call or you're on the phone, or even just like if you text a lot, be like, I'm just going to walk around and text, or I'm going to walk, but careful where you're going, but like, or I'm going to be on the phone and text, or every time there's a commercial, I'm going to get up and walk to the fridge and refill my water glass or something. Perfect.
That's great. And I think too, a lot of us have been, I have, people have said, oh, I'm just so addicted to Netflix, or I'm binging, I'm watching all these shows. I can't get out of it. I can't do anything else. And then I feel bad that I haven't done much else during the day. So it's like, okay, work with that. Okay. Your motivator is your show. Your motivator is watching this, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to almost create a little chart for yourself, or some things that you need to do. Like, okay, before I watch my show, I have these 3 things I need to do and I need to accomplish. And then that's your reward, and setting yourself up in that way too. And it's hard sometimes to stay consistent and kind of accountable with that. But again, roping someone in to have that accountability piece can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. We have a question about, perhaps feeling as though, reaching out to others and, not feel that way.
Yeah, that's good. So I think on either end of it, you want to have the mentality that people are there to support and not solve, right? So whether you're calling to check on someone, if you're finding, or if you find that you're like, I really need to reach out to people, but I don't want to be a burden, remember that mindset that, like, other people, whether you're the one kind of reaching out or you're the one receiving, that people are not there to solve things for you. People are there to support you. And that can kind of help us on both ends to, again, reframe kind of the expectation of the conversation. And I think too, just if you feel like, gosh, I'm always reaching out, check in with yourself and again, just say, what is my expectation of this conversation?
Mhm.
Do I, want someone to validate me? Do I want someone to solve this for me? Do I need to just vent? What do I need? And kind of, I think it's a good thing to kind of go into something reflecting and kind of acknowledging, like, what do I need? And it's okay to verbalize that, but it kind of lets you know too, it structures it for yourself, and it can be very helpful. But I do think on the receiving end, or when you're the one maybe touching base with someone, or if you feel like you're kind of picking up the pieces for everyone, really remind yourself that you are not there to solve. You're not there to give all these maybe direct advice and have ownership with that. You're there to support. So you're there to ask the questions and to validate how they feel, right? And to maybe ask them, what are your options with that? Or what could you do differently? And have those questions give them that sense of ownership rather than you kind of stating, oh, we'll do this. Oh, we'll try this. Oh, well, why didn't you do that? They need to have that ownership, which when they do achieve something, they'll have that momentum hopefully to keep going. So I hope that made sense.
Yeah, right. So like simply listening, right? Like just like being like on the receiving end, simply listening can be helpful for the person, not necessarily solving, but just knowing that it's a shared experience. Now that you're kind of telling me your story, it's a shared experience. And for the receiver, right? Like it can give a sense of like purpose to be able to be there for someone. So you might be by not reaching out to someone else and sharing your story and how you feel, you might be depriving someone of the opportunity of feeling purposeful or feeling like they are contributing, because contribution and sense of purpose are so important for our sense of well-being. And like if you're really concerned about being burdensome, there's always like therapy, right? Like we want to destigmatize seeking therapy. A therapist is someone who will listen and will be the type of support that you need.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. And that is a good sign too, if you feel like you're kind of always wanting to reach out or always needing that soothing, which makes sense right now. I think you're right. Therapy would be a great option. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
and you have your private practice in North Carolina?
In Charlotte, yes.
Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
And you see individuals and families?
I do. So, yep. And I am doing virtual right now. I'm maybe looking back into going in the office after the 4th for some days, but we'll see. It's just everything's up in the air, right? It's kind of the nature of what we're dealing with. So I really do. I love having this opportunity today. And I did think of one kind of silly thing that I know that I've used a lot during this pandemic for myself is sometimes I'll let myself know, like, I never have to do, June 5th, 2020 ever again, or I never have to do. And it's interesting because we feel like we're kind of doing the same thing over and over a lot, or we forget what day it is, but sometimes it's satisfying for me to say, this day will not be like exact replica. Like I never have to do this day again. And I actually got through it. And geez, it maybe wasn't graceful at all, but I got through it. Mm-hmm. And that too can give you that, like, okay, there we go, on to the next. And it can give you that empowerment of like, again, think of everything that we've navigated. Think of everything that we've navigated so far. We've done it. And, again, some gracefully, some not, but like, you guys are all here today. We're doing it.
Yeah. And to that point, I think it's so important to celebrate the things that we do. Mm-hmm. And to give ourselves credit for the things that we do. I think we spend a lot of time perhaps like focusing on the things that we're not doing, the things that we don't have, the things that we should have done.
Yes.
But giving ourselves credit for like all the little wins along the way. Don't wait until like the task is done to celebrate and like give yourself props. Celebrate every step along the way. Mm-hmm. That's what's going to keep your motivation going. That's when we feel good about ourselves, then we're a lot more motivated to keep going. Mm-hmm. So make sure to celebrate every step. And there's always something that you can celebrate. Whether it's like, I'm breathing, I'm alive, woohoo, or I put on pants today, real mm-hmm. pants, not yoga pants, but like real pants. Celebrate that. There's always something that you can kind of give yourself credit for and celebrate. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah.
Well, I truly, from the bottom of my heart, and I speak on behalf of the DC Psychological Association, we could not thank you more for volunteering your time and your knowledge and your expertise to us and to the community. It's such an act of kindness and generosity to give back in this way, and you really are contributing to the community and have more of an impact than you might realize. Like, this is gonna, go on YouTube, on our website. People are gonna be rewatching this, and you offered some really helpful tips. I love the S's. I wrote it down. I was like, ooh, I need to do that. Speak power service. That's a good, moment of reflection. So thank you so much for your generosity and your expertise. It was such a helpful presentation, truly.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor, and I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to let you guys all know and just remind you to be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself, and, remember that you're doing it. And, if you need to make a change, just go into it gradually. And I just wanted to thank you guys all again. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your questions. And feel free to reach out if anybody has any other questions or, anything else. I'll kind of put my email up here real quick again.
Your email up.
Yeah. So I'm more than happy. I'm so technologically challenged sometimes. Here we go. Okay. So yeah, feel free. Again, it's leah@leahmarone.com. So if anybody has any more questions or, needs any more resources, I'm more than happy to answer anything I can. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And we also have these like upcoming webinars if you guys want to check out the other things that we have going on, the health and fitness while stuck at home. We have a restorative yoga class. These are all free. Can You See Me? Honoring Black Mental Health During a Double Pandemic, and Food and Feelings Town Hall. I hope you guys will come to our other events. If you want to see this presentation, we'll have it up on our website. Leah will also put it on her website, leahmarone.com. And hope to see you all again. And thank you again so much.
Absolutely. Thank you guys, and everybody take care. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.